So hello and welcome to the Microgrid and their network barriers and opportunities panel. So I don't understand why this is standing room only, but we've got it recorded, and the buzz is going to cause people to go to the website and download this. And frankly, I'm super excited about these panelists. These are literally some of the people in the state that know the most about all of this, and have a very long and rich history dealing with microgrids in particular. And one of the things that we want to do today is to also harvest the information of folks in the room. And because we actually have one less panelist than we expected, and want to acknowledge my good friend and colleague, Vipul Gore, CEO and founder of Gridscape, which is one of the largest microgrid developers in the state. He had something he couldn't miss out on by way of an investor in his company, so we gave him a hall pass. But the reason I mention that is because I know there's some folks in the room that also have a lot of microgrid knowledge and experience, and I'd love to just literally have everybody introduce themselves, say the name of their company, what they do there, and how they relate to microgrid, so that we can actually have a more intimate circle of dialogue when we get to that. We do have an extra 15 minutes for that dialogue, so I think it'd be great to harvest who and what's in the room. So Ralph, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I'm Ralph Butch. I'm with Siemens, involved with total energy management. My focus is commercial and industrial customers. Develop microgrids for interested in virtual power plants. We have peak demand limiting technology and a lot of things we can bring to CCAs and to large C&I customers.
Hi, I'm David John. I'm with Mainspring Energy. I used to be at Energy Solutions, working on the Lancaster residential microgrid as a PM. So that's how I got involved, and I just kept seeing diesel generators pop up and thought there must be a better way to have backup power, and so that's why I joined Mainspring. We're a fuel flexible generator company. Thanks.
Name and organization.
Travis Shabrio, I'm with Reclaim Our Power Utility Justice Campaign.
And connection to microgrid policy. If you want to get
I was originally hired as a microgrid project manager. Now I do research and education.
I'm Creation with Climate Action Campaign. We're a nonprofit climate policy watchdog in Orange County in San Diego, Southern California. So we create the political and community will to facilitate policy adoption of things like microgrids, etc. So we need to learn about it first. We work a lot with Cotty Petrie-Norris, who's chair of the Assembly Energy and Utilities.
Hi everyone, Zoe Bennett, Senior Policy Analyst with Reimagine Power. Fortunate to be Allie's number 2, so I do a lot of our market development research and policy analysis.
I'm Robert Fudd. I'm from UCLA's California Center for Sustainable Communities, and myself, I've been working out with Naro. We prepared the case study for Vast Ellicott Heights, and my colleague who's not here did the EM&B for that project.
Hi, everybody. Peter Claver, California ISO. I'm a senior advisor. One of my roles is to work with our internal policy developers as well as external policy developers on opportunities for DER to participate in our markets. And I act as an advisor on many of the EPIC projects, many of which have been microgrids.
Harold Ben Fordham, I'm with Community and Energy Equity Resources. We support a lot of these ABC projects.
Good afternoon, everyone. Claudia Custodio from Vote Solar. We are a nonprofit advocacy group that works in the regulatory and legislative space to make renewable energy affordable, accessible, and equitable. And my role, I started this role in January, so I am inheriting a lot of the policies that Vote Solar has advocated for, especially microgrids and resilience hubs.
Everyone, Caleb Weiss, Clean Energy Associate with Environment California. So focusing on a lot of various distributed energy policies that we can advocate for at state level. Before this, I was previously with the Clean Coalition, so I know a little bit about the specific microgrid sort of aspect and all the resilience info that they've done research on, which is super interesting.
Hey everybody, Sheena Robinson with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, or APEN. We are an environmental justice organization building power with Asian American immigrant and refugee communities across the state. We work with our communities to pass clean energy and climate justice policy at the state level, and then also implement those policies at the local level, including community-driven resilience hubs.
Hi everyone, Roger Lynn with the Center for Evolved University's Energy Justice Program. We try to make sure there are more DERs out there, period. Just for on two levels, first for the community benefits, and second also because of the habitat and biodiversity destruction of the bulk system. And so we try to break this barrier.
Hi everyone, I'm Nina Zauger, also with the Center for Biological Diversity and their Energy Justice Program. And same as Roger, just trying to implement more DERs that are locally owned.
Hi everyone, my name is David Lee. I work with the State Treasurer's Office and I work on energy efficiency and solar and battery financing programs, and I'm looking forward to working on that microgrids.
I have some ideas for you, Dave. Hi, I'm Loretta Lynch. I'm a lawyer. I'm the former president of the PUC, and I know a whole lot about the regulatory barriers to
Folks, my name is Hayden Stephens. I'm a new senior policy analyst with MCE, a community choice aggregator that serves the North Bay area. So coming abreast of all policy opportunities and barriers related to PPPs and microgrids and all the things alike.
Good afternoon, Shana Hirschfield, Acting Sustainability Director for the City of Oakland. Doing what we can to get out of the way and make it easier and the obvious choice to do things like this. Thanks.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. Kate Gordon, now CEO of California Forward, formerly worked for the Secretary of Energy in the Biden administration and before that for Governor Newsom. We at California Forward are continuing a lot of the work that we started at the Department of Energy on community benefits plans and community benefits structures for a range of projects. And so excited about this conversation and those opportunities. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Jackson Guzay, also with UCLA's California Center for Sustainable Community. My colleague Rob up there. In addition to the AEC project, we do a lot of kind of state level research, CARB, CQC into energy transition at the state level.
Hi everyone, my name is Alistair Robinson. I'm a consultant at TLC Engineers. I'm involved with a bunch of different CEC funded, grant funded PPP projects.
Sandy Robertson, retired, useless and good for nothing.
I'm gonna follow that. Hi everyone, Eric Vito. I'm director of the CCA Workforce and Environmental Justice Alliance. And we are working to accelerate microgrids and other energy technologies by making sure that they're built on a high road for the benefit of workers and for the communities.
My name is Chris Seelig. I'm with Poder, which is an environmental and economic justice organization that organizes in San Francisco. We do like implementation, but we also do policy design and program design and implementation, and then we try to fix the policies and programs, kind of like iterative. And we're, super interested, as I mentioned this morning, in trying to figure out how to actually get the benefits of solar and batteries, not just like, even not just the virtual ones, but like the tangible direct benefits to tenants, residents in multi-residential buildings. And I had no idea how hard of a problem that is.
Hey everyone, my name is Julian Kraus-Polk. I am a economics and ecosystem policy specialist at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, which is LCI, formerly the Office of Planning Research, OPR. And I am here as part of like a broader research that our office is doing on the long range goals of the state of California, and I'm particularly interested in equity or energy equity goals. So I'm learning a lot today. To try to integrate some of these findings into how we're communicating the state's goals on equity.
Yes, and the last one, I'm Stephanie Pinsell, I'm the director of the California Center. I'm Stephanie Pinsell.
Yes.
The director of the California Center for Sustainable Communities at UCLA. And a professor. I started the Energy Atlas, which some of you may know. And so as a result of that, we've had an enormous amount of insight into the obfuscation of utilities around all kinds of things, including data. But we have also been very, very implicated in the BASI project since we did the initial modeling of that project. And have tried, a million different ways to do community solar, resilience centers, figuring out capacity of Los Angeles or solar self-generation and so on. And so it's very reassuring to see this kind of group coming together and continuing to push that envelope. And so I'm here partly as an observer, but also we work very closely with our DWP, which is not represented here. And public utilities, in my opinion, play a very important role in moving the ball forward. Very committed to equity, and my goal for them is best utility in the country, forcing every other utility to behave.
I think you're right, but yeah, whatever with.
Well, that's a big, wow. My knees are a little weak with the amount of expertise that we're looking at this way, so I'm gonna just dismiss these panelists here. There's 5 to raise your hand, you can get up here. A little bit more. No, but seriously, we are lucky to have you all in the room, and shout out to all the folk that made the trip upstairs for this particular focus area. What we want to do is we want to cover both the on the ground challenges, which we've already heard something about. We're going to really go quickly because this is such an expert audience, and frankly, we've covered some of the ground already. I'm going to especially invite Ali, who is the kind of cleanup hitter on what's happening legislatively, policy-wise, and what might happen with the ballot initiative. And we've got a lot of folk in here who can give some really good comment, both on like the integrity and robustness of the policy idea, and then frankly, some of the politics that might go into a ballot initiative as well. So with that in mind, I'm just going to turn it over to my colleague Canaro to lead us off.
I think I need this. I was thinking about our comments at the plenary session of how difficult it is to get people to do things, right? Like the customer. And then we're all sitting here, all of us very, very intent on doing the right thing. And spending lifetimes is still difficult, right? So it's still like, why is that so difficult? Okay, so I'll speak to a couple more things about BASI, do a little more deep dive. So the first one is community solar aggregation. And I'll describe, many things that you already know, but I'll go through the experience that we've had. So first and foremost, and I'll reference the image to the right top right. California is way behind on community solar, right? So other states have managed to work this out, have created markets, and have deployed a lot more than we have. So we're early in the map. The CPUC has or had a community solar green tariff, which BASI leveraged to do this first of a kind aggregation of 2 sites. That specific tariff was approved in 2018. They had a great size, or at least reasonable size, or 41 megawatts, but it was discontinued in 2024 with only achieving 8% of its goal. That program would funds the utility to operate the community solar program. It covers above market costs for the developer, and it provides a 20% bill discount to the customer. A lot of the homes and renters who would not otherwise have access to solar and the clean energy benefits are prime and target customers for these type of programs. We do expect a new program out of the CPUC in July of 26. Some proposed decision will likely come out under a community reviewable energy. So we'll see where that goes. So a little bit of context. What BASI achieved was the 2 sites, 400 kW and 270 kW respectively. So this is relatively small, but it is front of the meter. And so those were aggregated into a new resource into CAISO. And I'm glad that Peter is here, because if you have questions, I'm gonna just pass the mic over to him. And that project is serving approximately 360 households, right? It took 4 years. It went through a development phase that required 2 different bids into the CPA, the Clean Power Alliance. The local CCA was the off-taker. The interconnection process, the permitting process, things were just too lengthy of and too much of an effort. And so even though we were shortlisted on the first go, as we responded to the RFP, we had to essentially withdraw that project and wait for things to plan out. So we resubmitted it. And then it also took another 2 years to have it delivered from award of the PPA by CPA to the developer in December 22nd, to COD, to commercial operation date. I have here a quote from CAISO, which you can see there, that this could provide a bit of a template for Baker distributed energy aggregations. That's from a blog post article that they did. And also a study that was commissioned by the Coalition for Community Solar Access that shows overall $6.5 billion of system benefits, $4.2 billion of savings to the utility bills of people if we were to install 5.6 gigawatts of community solar in the right places, the right place in the circuit. So we know that this is a benefit. We know that it can save and address affordability. It addresses and provides clean energy to people that don't have access to, like renters. We just gotta continue to work on the policy. Here's a couple more things on that project. We lost our host at the very beginning. We went through a lengthy process and actually leveraged the energy atlases that we mentioned to identify possible locations of where this might go. But we learned that we need to really understand the value proposition to the host. And we also need to better understand site readiness, the interconnection capacities, and the costs of doing that. So just siting is a challenge. And you'll probably hear from developers who will probably put that at the top of the list. The CAISO wholesale market integration was actually also went through a little bit of was a challenge just because it was the first time perhaps. But I think that the experience itself provides hope that we can streamline that process and we can allow for more small projects like this to be integrated. There is Lorenzo during the plenary session asked me about what community meant in community, solar. And, I think what it means, as I, kept thinking about it after I, probably didn't respond correctly, was that it means local agencies, that it means that local planning needs to be front and center, right? So maybe there's a better or more, a bigger role for local government to have a say on how things are installed and where. We also need more data, more mapping capacity to understand where, community solar can have the most benefit to the grid, and in doing so, support electrification more broadly. When we did this project, they did not allow, or the program itself did not allow for battery storage, and so we need to make sure that going forward and the new programs that battery storage is included, and then we need to explore how solar and storage front of the meter can have that regional or zonal or global reliability and resilience for the community. So state policy recommendations is increase the program size. What we heard from developers is that it is an investment of a lot of time and effort and staffing and whatnot to sort of like go into a new market. And if the size of the program is not big enough, they're not going to do it. And they also have to have the right funding criteria. In California, because there hasn't been a solar market, what we have is sort of utility scale developers. We have C&I and residential developers, but not, very few people that are comfortable working in that background. And then we need to improve how we value distributed assets, right? So sort of that going back to the value of distribution, generation and distribution assets and DRs, both behind the meter and in front of the meter. So I think that's it. I will move on to a new topic. So this is another one of our projects that unfortunately did not work out. It is a resilience center. We lost our original site. The site was a church.
We had a great asset, lots of open space, lots of roof space as well. Through the process of pitching them or through the process of designing the system, they, at some point decided that that wasn't something that they were interested in anymore. So unfortunately, we had to go through a process of looking for a new site. We consulted with our community advisory committee, our technical advisory committee, did a community survey. What we really found was concerns around privacy. So the school district, for instance, said, well, we don't know if, having this community center or energy hub where, we are expected to provide services to the community, what does that mean for our students? What are the hours of operation? How are we switching the way in which we operate the facility? So there was a lot of concerns around that. The buying and the design and the economics of the project was, challenge. It was an iterative process. We were given, the thumbs up from the county that they were interested in doing this part. We went through 60% design. But there was a lot of complications on just sort of like the design process itself and getting the buy-in from the community, the stakeholders at the park, right? Like what is the battery going to be located and how does it interfere with the location or with just the operations of the park and kids, from the basics of, is it intervening on the walkway? Is it next to, or, is there a liability concern? Is it impacting the way that the facility is being used now? Concerns around, even though this was a positive NPV and, great sense to make for the property owner, for the county park, contract had a lot of questions and legal had a lot of questions and, the PPA, the contracts, the different departments that had to weigh in. That was a very lengthy process that ultimately killed the project. We had secured NAM 2.0, we had secured a sizable SGB incentive, we had pre-purchase equipment to go through and essentially get away from or move away from the complications of long procurement cycles, especially after the pandemic. And none of that mattered because at the end of the day, the developer said, well, now that we've cleared all of these red tapes, now we don't have enough time to deliver and not, being able to deliver in the short window of time that we had jeopardized NAM 2.0, and with NAM 2.0 things changed and all those things. So in April of 24, we changed the scope of the CEC and we had to change course. So I think some of the challenges that that I've mentioned are already, I've already mentioned some of the things that I have in this slide in terms of challenges. And so I want to plug a couple other resources that I think are worthy, since we did not do the implementation. One is from the Local Clean Energy Alliance. District of R has made various presentations on this, which is the top image there. And that's really questioning the operations of the facility and the needs that it needs to provide for the community. The USDN, you probably know all of this, right? But they have a great set of resources. And you can see on those 5 pillars that the urban sustainability direction network focuses on. We were really working on one, right? We were working on resilient power, but our energy hub has a lot more, right? It needs to do a lot more. And so when we build these projects with the community buy-in, we need to think of all those things. I'll also plug the so-called Advanced Energy Resilience Action Planning as a way that they've been doing a lot with local governments to understand their facilities, to understand where and how energy hubs can be developed. And then the Clean Power Alliance has done some innovative work on financing and procuring on behalf of its member agencies, and essentially streamlining the process so that local governments can actually have the capacity, to do some of this work. So I did bring those insights because I wanted to share that a lot of other people are doing great work. And we just want to, kind of bring that into the table, into the discussion. I think that's on my slides.
Opened it up for a couple questions on Hanaro's presentation, and we'll circle back to a lot of the themes, but just anything in particular, yeah.
I missed, there was on one of the first slides, something about SCE and what was their engagement on that?
So that little visual, I didn't explain it, but it basically means that for this process, for this project, the 2 sites had to go through interconnection and distribution agreements with the utility.
but they were contractually obligated to serve and to, have CCA as the off-taker. And then the CCA had the scheduling coordinator agreement to dispatch that energy to the CAISO, right? And so it's just a visual of seeing like the roles and, responsibilities of the different entities. And I thought it was nice to sort of visually show it.
Yeah, we're just trying to capture it for the video recording.
Thanks for all your work, and the struggle, along the road. In terms of the green tariff program, can you talk, so you said 8% was successfully utilized, then cancel it. Can you spend a little more time talking about like where there was success and ultimately like why there was failure, in deploying the prior program?
So there was a counterpart to this green tariff, which was a disadvantaged community green tariff. And in that program, kind of sister program to this one, they did not require local participation, local sponsorship of, they also did not require that the generation or the project be near the load that it was serving. And I think that through the process of, looking to iterate and improve the community solar market, stakeholders, pushed back on sort of this requirement of having that local project be local to the community. And said, well, we can probably do more projects if you just get rid of it. And we can, find other properties, other locations, right? And so what happens is that you end up going farther and farther away from the load, which I think fundamentally we don't want that. But that was just addressing the concerns from the developers and, in my opinion, looking to create an easier program, right? That more people have interest in. As far as the local sponsorship, they removed that because it wasn't funded. So I don't know that we wanted it removed. I think we'd rather have it in place, but funded so that local organizations and local agencies and local governments can have a role so that they can actually do that planning and development themselves and help the developers site and permit projects.
Thank you so much. I just want to note parenthetically that I was involved with a couple other stakeholders in putting together, Climate Center was one, basically a proposal for a statewide multi-$100 million, CRC, Community Resilience Center program concept during one of the years. It was probably 7-8 years ago. I remember presenting it to the gentleman who's now Mayor Mahan down in San Jose, was the head of Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Energy Committee at the time. And everybody was so excited and everybody was so aligned. And then it was contingent basically on a budget surplus that was like right around COVID. It turned into a threatened budget deficit and didn't really happen. And so I think that one of the issues that we didn't want to take up is how can we get a prioritized set of money that's going to stay put long enough, which really means, better part of a decade at least, because these projects take 3 to 5 years if all goes well. And if things don't go well, they take longer. And, you'd think a 4 to 5 year CEC grant period would be enough, but when you count finding a site, arranging stakeholders, finding funding, aligning multiple funding streams, and then getting it bid and getting it done and having local government be involved at multiple levels as the drivers or the hosts or whatever it may be, you've got to have a window that's longer than that and a money source that sustains for longer than just a 3 to 4 year grant. So I think as we go into our discussion period, it's kind of like, well, we just have to acknowledge the complexity here. And also we have to acknowledge the fact that there are no entities, and Hanaro touched on this, there are no entities that are purpose-built to develop microgrids in complex, settings like resilience hubs. Yeah, sure, a hospital, no problem. Hospital microgrid, bam, call Siemens, call whomever, call Swinnerton, they know what they're doing, they'll get it done in a year. But when you talk about coordinating multiple agencies that haven't ever done this before and have all the concerns that any local government or school or whatever would have, it's like, it's another beast completely. So I just think we can't impose private sector assumptions about how quick and easy it is to do. And it's not for them either. But it is a different beast. Okay, let me move on to Rich.
Okay, so I'm with the IE at UC Berkeley, Rich Brown. So you heard Therese this morning kind of generally talk about EcoBlock. I'm going to be talking about the microgrid portion of it. Let me just start by kind of reiterating or recapitulating what our goals were with EcoBlock at the beginning. If you go back 10 years to the beginning of the planning grant, the idea essentially was an energy makeover of an urban residential block. So this is our block we wound up doing our demonstration at. So you can imagine it was meant to be this integrated package of energy efficiency to reduce the loads, electrification to get natural gas burning out of the block, rooftop solar to meet the residual loads. And then the microgrid was really an integral part of this vision for several reasons. One was to share electrons so that the rooftop solar systems, you could use the collective generation capacity of all the rooftops to essentially meet everybody's residual energy needs. You know, you can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions even further that way. There was a resiliency and reliability angle that when we electrify all these homes, power outages become more of a concern. And so we wanted to address that, the issue of, you know, having your entire house powered by one fuel and reliability of that fuel. So having its backup power was important. And then the other is you consider an energy democracy angle to it, that through community ownership and operation of these assets, the community can actually profit from the energy that's being produced and shared. So that was the original vision. And you know, you heard this morning from Trace that not all that came to pass, but I'll dive more into the details of that. So just to give you a little bit more background about, you know, kind of the different components of the microgrid. So you know, a microgrid consists of, you know, distribution assets, generation, you have some loads you serve, there's an ownership model, and then there's some sort of financial arrangement for how the customers compensate the owner. So just to run through this, so on the distribution, what we wound up trying to do was using the utilities overhead lines. So using the IOUs overhead lines. I have an asterisk there because originally our plan was we were going to install our own undergrounded lines actually and use a DC distribution system to directly distribute the solar to the battery and to the loads and to the EVs, which all mostly run on DC power natively. And so the idea originally was that the community was going to own and operate its own distribution system. And you know, those of you who know utility regulations, as Lynch, you think, why are you even going down that road? Well, this is a research project. This was before even, you know, the California microgrid law was passed, SB 1339, a few years ago, before the IOUs came out with their community microgrid enablement tariffs. And so it was a pretty open landscape at that point, and we wanted to test the boundaries of what was possible. So that was one area where, you know, that was a key part of it. For the generation, I mentioned rooftop solar, plus a front of the meter battery. We wanted to have a shared battery to get economies of scale. That's part of the philosophy of EcoBlock, is doing things at scale to try and do things more efficiently, lower costs. It also allows you to power the microgrid from a single source, so it makes the controls a bit easier. One of the challenges in a residential neighborhood, an existing neighborhood, is finding a space for a battery. So I'll talk a little bit about what we did there. For the loads, we have our retail customers and a shared EV. Originally, the way we were looking at this, the way we wanted to essentially operate the microgrid is, if we had been able to install our own distribution system, was to have it metered at the point of coupling with the utility. So essentially it would be community net energy metering. So that was our vision for how we want to do this. The community would own the assets here. And then ultimately, we wound up trying to do this under the community microgrid enablement tariff that the IOUs developed as part of the CPUC microgrid proceeding. I just described how originally we wanted to have more of a community tariff. Okay, so that was the vision, was this integrated system. Diving into this a little more, you saw this earlier, but I'll give it a little bit more detail. So under the schematic design that we evolved to after conversations with PG&E and lots of conversations with PG&E, we worked with them for over 2 years with weekly meetings and documents going back and forth. And this was while they were developing the community microgrid enablement tariff. It didn't exist at that point. And, you know, I'd like to think that part of what, you know, the process of working with PG&E and the microgrid group there very intensively helped them develop the CMAP, the community microgrid enablement program, which is where they work with communities to develop these and apply for these community microgrids that would then be tariffed or interconnected under the community microgrid enablement tariff. So it's, sorry for all the jargon here. So the idea is, you know, PG&E distribution, there's about 100 kilowatts of solar on the homes. That's kind of the most we could fit on the roofs. Conveniently, the peak load on the block is about 100 kilowatts as well. So we roughly can meet the peak load with the with solar that's there. The design we developed, we had a 2-hour battery. It's interconnected front of the meter, similar to what Nara was talking about with the community solar system that they were doing. So a shared resource like that at this scale pretty much has to be connected front of the meter. The downside of that is you have to go through what's called the WDAT, or the wholesale distribution tariff, which is this laborious process, which it's essentially, you can think of it as a way for the IOUs to kill distributed energy projects. And so, but anyway, citing this, you can kind of see there the battery kind of hanging off of the distribution system there. Where we wound up citing it is on one of our participating residents' lots. They had a detached garage that was falling down and needed to be rebuilt. And so we worked out a deal where we would rebuild the garage and locate the battery there. He was willing to dedicate part of the garage for the battery. There's all sorts of additional infrastructure you need for that setup. For instance, we needed a ground transformer because when it's in island mode, the protection that's required, we have to have a special transformer for that. There needs to be a microgrid controller. We were working with a great startup called Hail Energy. Doesn't exist anymore, but and then part of the scheme also was a home energy management system in each of the homes that would work with the microgrid controller to be able to do demand management during outages to manage the battery capacity essentially. So it was kind of an integrated system, which also would allow the whole system to be able to provide grid services as well if through the microgrid controller. And then part of the vision also is this shared EV, which would require a curbside charger for charging charged off microgrid. Okay, so another piece of this was we developed a scheme where not all the houses would need to participate. One of the issues is in island mode, if there are houses who aren't participating and haven't paid into the system, should they get backup power or not? And so we developed a concept. It didn't get beyond the concept phase, but PG&E was willing to explore this where non-participating customers would be disconnected when the microgrid islands, so that only the participating customers actually receive backup power. Now, we didn't take that all the way through to fruition, and they weren't willing to put in the end, the engineering time to actually work that out, how to do that in real time, because this would be using the automated disconnect switches or remotely operable disconnect switches in the smart meters, to be able to shut off service to customers. So but that's a concept that they were at least willing to entertain. Okay, so what we actually implemented, you saw this morning with Therese. Oops, let me go back here. So we did the solar, and the other thing I think that's innovative that we are implementing is the ownership of the solar by the block. We worked with them to form essentially an HOA. It doesn't have all the characteristics of an HOA. It's kind of a light co-op model. And then there's a process for the association to bill for dues essentially to cover the operation of the solar. So that's somewhat of an innovation that we've worked out here. And if you have a microgrid, that's essentially some entity that owns and operates and can maintain the microgrid. So that was originally why we went down that path of the community ownership. I think with just rooftop solar, probably doesn't make sense to do community ownership for several reasons. One is insurance. If it's community owned, it has to be separately insured. It's not insured under people's homeowner insurance policies, which is an additional cost. So there are some drawbacks to that approach as well. Okay, challenges and barriers. I'll just go through these kind of blocks. So financial. To create a microgrid, you have to add switch gear to be able to island. That's expensive. It turned out to cost a lot in this case because this was an underinvested area of the grid. And it turned out we didn't qualify for incentives under the PG&E's microgrid incentive program because we needed to be in a DAC area. We weren't quite in a DAC area. Anyway, long story, but a big financial drawback to the CMET is that the microgrid really only exists during an outage, during black sky events. During blue sky, each customer is on their own. They're just a retail customer. There's no incentive for them to work together to manage their load or to discharge the battery to support the grid. They're just standard retail customers. And what we found is that if you're only getting value for the reliability value of the microgrid in a residential setting where the power reliability is pretty high, there aren't very many outages there. There's just not the value from residential customers to justify all this cost of building a microgrid. Therese talked this morning about the EV sharing restricted to block residents. We felt that was an important part of getting participation in the EV share or to have it available. And it really, it made it hard for a private vendor to actually make it profitable, essentially, if it's limited to this very small market. Okay, on the regulatory side, Teresa mentioned this also, and Allie will get a lot more into this about the sharing across property lines, essentially. We feel that because the power is generated by a communally owned asset and it's shared among the owners of that asset across property lines, we're not selling it, we're just sharing the power. We believe that falls under the own use rules, under Rule 218. We've written a legal memo to the CPUC on this. It's available on the EcoBlock website if anybody wants to look at that. Ultimately, this needs to be litigated to verify whether our hypothesis is true, and we didn't have funds to litigate this. So another barrier, I mentioned the garage. So that became what we call the energy shack, which was a well-engineered because of fire code and just land use noise ordinance, basically. The fan noise from a battery and inverter. We had to build an enclosure that was soundproof and was had fire-rated walls and things. And it turned into I think maybe $150,000 garage, with, but we did develop the full permit set for that and, that exists. So some of the permitting there is an issue. Some permitting with the EV charger. And then on the social side, I think one of the barriers we faced with the EV is that dedicating a parking space on a pretty, parking impacted street, it's a hard sell for residents. And so they really have to trust that they're gonna be able to give up their second vehicle, and several families would be able to free up some parking to make the shared EV worthwhile. So I think that's the, I mentioned the ongoing management, which is, that's, the HOA essentially you have to have confidence that that's gonna stay in effect for, the lifetime of the microgrid, which is a pretty long time for, for community organization. Okay, I think that's the end of my slides. I guess that's it. Well, you have a separate.
No, I don't.
Okay, do you want to take a couple?
Yeah, let's take a couple questions.
Okay, yeah, yes.
Props to you for weekly meetings with PG&E. Yeah.
The PG&E, the people at PG&E, we've loved working with. They meet well and they're smart and dedicated. So the meetings were great, but the process is what kills you.
They do a good meeting, yeah. Question, you mentioned something about having a co-op light system. In retrospect, would you go to co-op heavy and go back to your original vision and just use your own wires and get out of the system?
Well, I don't think the owning our own wires, I think that we would be, regulated as a utility under the utility law.
Well, if you were a co-op, that'd be different. So if you were already a light co-op, why not just do the full-on be a co-op?
We could, you're saying a utility co-op?
You are a
utility, yeah.
And that takes you outside the whole PUD.
I think you could do that. The transaction costs would be too high for that at the block level. If an organizational form to do it, let's say at the city level, or maybe CCA could could serve that role, that you need to socialize the costs or spread the costs, the formation costs over a larger set of customers, essentially. So a lot of this, a lot of the finances don't really work at the individual block level. You get some economies of scale, but there's a lot of startup costs and transaction costs that if you can spread those over a whole district or a city or a whole region, and then you're implementing it, I think the block makes a lot of sense as an implementation unit, that you're implementing it block by block, but it's building up, it's served by a foundation of a program that's bringing financing and some of these other, the legal structures and things like that, where you get economies of scale, like, you write one contract and then you can apply it to, 200 blocks or something like that. That would be the ideal model. Yeah.
Thank you. I just would love to hear more about the homeowners association aspect of this, like how it helps with the operational barriers, regulatory, like where do you think that that's like a key part of pulling this off in the future?
Yeah, I think this is another case where at the individual block level, it's any HOA, you're depending on volunteer labor essentially, and so you need to provide a fair amount of resources to the residents to be able to operate this. So it probably works better at the maybe a city district, like a neighborhood association or somewhere where you have a larger pool of people to draw on for to form the board and to be able to there's some work that's involved in running the billing for the dues for the HOA and things like that. And so it probably needs to be done at a larger level, but then at each individual block can kind of buy into that system. And maybe they would have representatives on some sort of a board or something, I haven't thought through all the details.
Do you think it would be helpful to have like some kind of, I guess when I'm thinking about like education about microgrids and this sort of system. I think about it like house to house level. Do you think it'd be helpful to have some kind of advocacy group focused on building like HOA specific, like providing specifically for HOAs the resources, information they need, and like, I don't know, I guess just thinking on this more of like the HOA unlocks like a whole new level
Yeah,
between communities and individuals.
yeah, it is a good skill to do. And there are HOAs that we've interacted with for condos and other sorts of like retirement communities that are in more rural areas, that are in fire zones where they're really interested in backup power systems for for PSPS situations. And I think that is a really good kind of use case for this, where you have an existing HOA, you have existing kind of communal ownership structures, and this would kind of be layered on top of that. Yeah. Yeah. Save time for Ally, so let's make this last one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You just started talking about like, based on everything we've learned, this block might not have been the best target. Can you build on the use case conversation you just started, and like where you're seeing the opportunity that this actually makes sense to do more of?
Yeah, so I could probably answer it two ways. One is, I think for a community on the full on microgrid, where you can island the whole grid, I think, you need to have lower power reliability and, possibly some sort of, wildfire barrier, that sort of situation. Where reliability has a higher value essentially. So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing is, one of our lessons learned from the whole project is we just have to focus on reducing the cost of these things. And Therese mentioned, and I actually mentioned the affordability panel, avoiding service upgrades. So because that's a pretty costly thing to do. So just trying to cut costs out of the system wherever you can. And I'm interested in exploring some kind of limited power reliability. So, small backup batteries in homes with limited power sharing. So ways to share power across property lines where it's not a full-on microgrid. You're not serving like, multi-kilowatt loads. But if you can share a few hundred watts with your neighbor across your property line, so that if your neighbor's battery runs down during a power outage and you still have power, you can share power with them. So some very low cost technologies that can scale. They get economies of scale through manufacturing, essentially. It's like solar panels, that kind of thing. I think if we need some new reliability technologies that can allow people to share power easily among neighbors. It's like, going to your neighbor and borrowing a cup of sugar kind of thing, very, very, small, low level, but, you need some backup power, and so it serves that. Yeah. Okay.
Over here. Big words, but you said, so yeah, you got 22 minutes.
Okay, I don't have to rush through this. Hi, everybody, thanks for being here. Ally Dietrich with Reimagine Power, also the senior advisor of the Microgrid Resources Coalition. I think there's a really great group in this room, so I just want to thank everyone for being here again. I feel like we're really well represented between different community-based organizations, developers, academics, public-private sector. We got a good group here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of summing it all up. So I had the privilege, Richard recruited me in to work with all of the different AEC projects. We were first kind of going through like first phase, second phase, 10th phase, and really kind of like looking at all of the different like lessons learned, the project experiences of all of the different microgrid projects that were funded by the CEC grants, and kind of figure out what are some of the policy pathways forward to make these projects way smoother to build, way easier, a lot more cost effective, and be able to scale them a lot more. And so we have a lot of the history lessons, notes from the field, tails of the negotiating table, hearings going off the rails, chaos, many countries, where all the blood, sweat, and tears that have been poured on microgrids, like, let me tell you, if you didn't hear enough from these two already, I'll be more blunt with everybody about the trials and tribulations and what we actually need in terms of our like pathways forward to make this a lot smoother, and so we can build these a lot more widely across the state and beyond. So microgrids, I think, really most important to level set here on like the policy objectives that microgrids really help us achieve. Affordability first and foremost. We could actually save customers a ton of money by installing microgrids, and not just on the individual like microgrid level, but actually the benefits. Rich talked about this a little bit, sort of narrow about the blue sky benefits that microgrids can provide, as well as the black sky benefits and to the system itself. If we had a clear monetization pathway for both the blue sky and the black sky benefits, we would really be able to tackle our affordability challenges both from like a microgrid scale and individual customers, but from the system level to help reduce all of our transmission distribution costs and the bulk power system costs. It's really the bulk of our bills and help drive down those costs. Reliability, obviously, we care about actually having the capacity on the grid to serve our needs. Resiliency, the backup power, as well as the clean energy sustainability. Importantly, the democratization. I think that's a really key emphasis here, is that we really do want to put more power in the hands of the people. And so that is a really key goal, I think, with microgrids. And as well, like, not forgetting about the private sector, the clean tech innovation, the opportunities for us to really drive down costs further and spur more innovation with microgrids. That achieves a lot of our core policy objectives. So really, same thing. I'm not gonna go through this here, but like, this is kind of our vision, right? We would love to see this like everywhere. Some of these radial poles and wires that keep, catching on fire all the time, and or just not having reliable power at the individual and customer scale. So before I go into kind of the project experiences a little bit more, I'll just say like at an aggregate sum. Our first go around with this group that we formed, we did a lot of stakeholder conversations, really dove into the depths of a couple of these projects with the AEC communities, and really looking at like what was the lessons learned, what are kind of some of the policy recommendations we'd have if we had to like take all of these lessons learned, all the blood, sweat, and tears. So originally it was focusing on changing Public Utilities Section 218, which defines what is and is not an electrical utility, including there's provisions in there about that you are not allowed to distribute power across more than 2 properties or across a public street or right of way for compensation without becoming a public utility subject to CPUC oversight, which is extremely onerous. There are a couple other avenues that I've explored in my professional career on how you might be able to do that, such as cooperatives or micro utilities. And pretty much all those avenues are all but shut. But we have some more to talk about on the cooperatives concept. So really the biggest one is that I'd say overarchingly, if that rule is called the over the fence rule, Section 218, many of you have probably heard of it. If this rule was changed, first of all, it was written in the 50s originally. If you read that code section, it is so difficult to read and understand what it means. It's rife for lots of different regulatory interpretations, as each of these folks have figured out over time, including some that say that a community scale project that is sharing power, not distributing power for compensation, would just be considered using its own use. But there's also other stakeholders that think that anything that's sharing power in any sort of realm besides your own individual property is considered being a public utility. So if we change this rule, and I think just frankly a clean rewrite, let's rewrite it for the 21st century, would make it so much easier to build and own and operate microgrids of all different shapes and sizes. So the beauty of microgrids is that it's a system. We talk a lot about solar and storage and EV charging, but I just want to emphasize that like microgrids can meet any different kind of technologies. They can provide a number of different energy optimization benefits as well as the resiliency benefits. And so originally, when we were looking at this, we said, one of the biggest emphasis points is like, let's have like an operator, a community microgrid operator, like a point, like an agent essentially that would be the transaction point with the utility and be able to like both have the interconnection point as well as organize the microgrid's resources and the participants behind that point of common coupling. And so at the time when we were looking at this microgrid proceeding had just kicked off, I was actually privileged to work with senators during the original passage of that bill. They had just kicked the proceeding off, and this idea of the micro utility statute, which was really a definition that was put in by Kirkwood Public Utilities District a long time ago because they wanted to make sure their diesel generators that were powering one area of like the ski resort were not considered a public utility subject to CPUC regulation, but they never went so far as to go beyond defining that. And so it was kind of raised that this micro utilities definition existed in the legal statute. And so we said, hey, under this definition, which was basically under 2,000 customers that you were basically under 2,000 customers, you could be considered a utility but subject to a lighter form of regulation, we should create this designation called community microgrid operator. And under that framework, or under that statute, which was already on the books, you could then develop a framework, and we said we should allow community microgrid operators to develop microgrids that could do master metering, cross rights of way, and serve multiple customers. And as part of that, we want to make sure we develop electrons that allow us to share electrons between neighbors and within communities in the small geographic scale, and develop the value-based compensation rates for grid services and load flexibility, kind of like what Haro talked about. So we were looking at those were kind of original policy recommendations. And as part of that, the interconnection processes could be improved greatly and not make us do a whole bunch of individual interconnection applications for different microgrid resources when they're all supposed to be interconnected as one together. So that was our original one. And so really this microgrid proceeding, it took 6 years. And I will just say, I'm gonna be blunt with everybody, which is that community microgrid enablement program and tariff, those were designed to be red herrings from the beginning. They were not really designed to be successful.
Don't sugarcoat it.
I'm not sugarcoating it at all. Everyone else was very, very kind. I'm gonna be the bad cop today. But I've got, again, blood, sweat, and tears to prove it. So the final CMAT tariff and the microgrid implementation program took years and years to develop. This schedule is from years and years ago. This was scoped for 2022 and it fell to 2024 with pretty much nothing to show for it. If any of those microgrids actually get built, I will eat my words, but I think hardly any of them are actually gonna get built, except maybe 1 or 2 pet projects of the utilities. And unfortunately, I'll get to this in a second, why they are just really the suboptimal kind of microgrid design. And they don't really facilitate kind of the optimal microgrid, community microgrid design and operational kind of benefits that we're looking for with these types of systems. So, and Rich had some different, I think everybody's seen the eco block vision right now, but I'm bringing up this particular slide on purpose to show the original vision, because I think it does a really good job encapsulating what is the vision of a community microgrid, what our ideal world looks like, is we have individual customers, they each have their own properties, but they can have all these different resources. Let's say we have solar, we have battery storage, we have electric vehicle charging, but really importantly, we have the distribution infrastructure that has a single point of interconnection with the utility. This would actually be easier for everybody, including the utility. They would have one point of common coupling they interconnect with and transact with, and at that point, behind that point, you can then share the actual electrons, you can share the cost, you can share the benefits, and this was the original vision that we'd love to see more of in the future. Lancaster had a similar vision where they ended up kind of going with more of like the virtual power plant. Someone else, they were in the Lancaster project at one point, can talk more about this than me being on the ground. But originally they were looking at doing not just a virtual power plant, but a whole green district program, having the schools with solar and storage with the resiliency hubs, as well as like 2 residential microgrids. Same thing, Lancaster ran into a lot of issues with Southern California Edison over the years in trying to get this vision off the ground, especially the other piece I think is really important is like, really how do we unlock that market participation or monetization pathway that solves the problems that Rich was really talking about, which is the financing of these systems. If we have a pathway to monetize the actual services that microgrids can provide in blue sky conditions, which they can provide a lot of different ones, I don't need to list all the myriad benefits, but they can, that provides a financing mechanism for a third party, like a developer or like a customer, to work together and build a microgrid, actually finance the infrastructure development and the operation of it. And that monetization pathway provides that stable revenue stream to actually make the project pay for itself over time and deliver savings to included customers and actually support all ratepayers. And then I want to just emphasize one more of these projects, not part of our like kind of AEC collection here that we've been featuring today, but what I want to talk about where this did get done. Now, Blue Lake Rancheria is a tribe. It is considered one customer, but really what they did was they developed solar and batteries. I think they had some biomass and some originally diesel generators that they reintegrated. One of the things that was really interesting about this project serves as a resiliency hub. It's at the end of a PG&E line with a lot of frequent power outages. This microgrid is what I consider like your shining star, but it's a good example of a good community microgrid design and operation. And you know what they did? Because it's a tribe, that is authority that supersedes that of the state government and the utilities, they were actually able to enter into a purchase and sale of the end of the line distribution infrastructure. So what EcoBlock was looking to do was basically have, underground distribution infrastructure and actually do it themselves. This was basically taken where they were allowed to purchase the end of the line distribution system, reconfigure it to serve 7 buildings, which are all technically on one property, but at that scale, we're talking about like what would be considered a block if you looked at this, parceling this out, and they interconnected all of the buildings behind a single common coupling, one single meter with utility, and they have just on a regular E19 commercial rate with the utility. And then behind that point, they can socialize the costs of the microgrid, including the benefits with all of the included buildings, and share the electrons between each of the buildings, and they can serve as the resiliency hub when needed. I think they also actually participate, like either the DSGS program or the emergency load reductions. They actually provide that capacity support to the grid by intentionally islanding when the grid needs the support, and they can actually export when needed. So this is what I would say is a prime example of like the community microgrid design operation that we'd like to see more of, both whether it's a single customer, a campus microgrid, or multiple customers in a discrete geographic area like a block or a city town square, something like that, industrial park, you name it. There's lots of boundaries you could put on the scope of community microgrids. And so with our project, our policy recommendations, that I'll get into a little bit more in a second, like we want to keep the world of possibilities up open very broadly, because we could have a neighborhood and urban community. You can have rural areas at the very end of the line and everything in between. That's the beauty of microgrids, is that they're a system, they can be configured in any different number of shapes and sizes. And we want to preserve that optionality, but we do want to make sure that we can maximize the benefits of microgrids for everybody, which includes the blue sky and the black sky. So I just want to emphasize Blue Lake Rancheria. By the way, that like distribution infrastructure, that was done through a tier 2 advice letter approval with the PUC. It was literally one document. The book value of those assets was named and put out there, and it was literally done within like 90 days, I think, something like that. Now, this was back in 2015, 2016. Again, it's a tribe, but nonetheless, there is a pathway. There's a process by which this can be done. And I think frankly, had we been able to do that from the beginning with EcoBlock, with Lancaster, with Boston Avocado Heights, we would have all of those projects built in half the time and half the cost, if not more.
If I might just interject on that one, we tried, the city of Lancaster tried to do a spot municipalization and just get the micro utility benefit and get the streamlining and so on. And the only precedent was, mobile home park and some small city in California, I can't remember which one, had done something like that, but it was same old. It was too long a process and too uncertain of a positive result to make use of what would have been a great loophole.
Well, and even like, worked with Sonova, they actually looked into this micro utility framework a lot. And because the microgrid proceeding was going on, there was actually, a big company that is now bankrupt and went bankrupt for different reasons than a microgrid, but actually went so far as to try and become a micro utility at the PUC and say, we're willing to be regulated, we're holding ourselves out to be regulated. Can you please create a process by which we can serve? They had greenfield new home communities that they were looking, not even using any existing infrastructure of the utility, and they denied that application without a public hearing and went through. It was quite disappointing. But nonetheless, like this, I think this is a good graphic of the Blue Lake Ranch that kind of talks about what I've been saying is like, or visualizes what I've been talking about, which is that, there's the single point interconnection with PG grid. Behind that point of common coupling, you can have any different kind of technology, any different way of sharing the resources, and there's just one point of transaction. And that really helps to streamline things for everybody involved while still delivering all the benefits of a microgrid. So when we're designing our policy recommendations, this kind of community microgrid design framework is what we're really looking at, having our policy framework hinged around. The microgrid enablement program and the microgrid incentive program, they are not looking at doing it this way. They are looking at making sure that the investment utility is the center of the universe, using all of their existing infrastructure and designing microgrids in a piecemeal fashion where all the microgrid resources are considered kind of separate resources. They're not integrated to provide any blue sky benefits, either for the included customers or for the grid. They're really only designed to basically have some switch gear and some protection at the PG&E grid point here, and then say we get resiliency in black sky conditions. By the way, that CMET tariff, they don't guarantee you resiliency in an islanding situation. That's the other reason why that is just not kind of a no-go for a lot of communities. Why would you even if you're getting $15 million for a microgrid, why would you go through the pain and hassle of all of that when you're not even guaranteed resiliency in an outage? Why do you design a microgrid in the first place? So anyway, I hope some of those projects actually get built. I look forward to seeing that if and when the day comes. In the meantime, one of the biggest barriers, again, as we've talked about, is the Public Utilities Code Section 218, the over the fence rule. And so this is where Rich kind of got into this a little bit more. I'm low on time, so I just kind of want to just emphasize why this is one of the biggest ones. This is the biggest barrier to community microgrids in California. Oregon, which I had the privilege of working on the bills that just passed up there this past summer, they are looking at really just addressing this head on, where not only though they're gonna get rid of their over the fence rule, but they're actually having a process by which the local governments and communities can actually have microgrid zones designated. So they can build microgrids of any shape, size, and configuration, so long as there's like an approval process and the communities get to provide their input. And then they will be able to build microgrids that serve multiple customers. And that's something that's getting done at the PUC up there now. So it's something, some lessons we can take from Oregon back to California. Now, there's a really important policy precedent history behind changing this over the fence rule. We've done it before. This is not a groundbreaking revolutionary idea. We did it for cogeneration in the 80s. We created the independent solar energy producer exemption in 2008, which basically said if you're going to install solar on your own home, or if you have a PPA with a third party provider, you're not considered a utility. We had the electric vehicle charging facilities be considered not public utilities. There was one in 2011. I think there's actually more recent legislation that provides a carve out, but we are likely to need to change this law again, because even though you could make some very compelling legal arguments, which I agree with, that you do it for your own use, if you're not, distributing power for compensation across rights of way, you should be able to not be considered an electrical corporation. It would just be really nice if we could have this law be much more clearly and plainly written and interpreted so that we can build community microgrids like all the AEC projects. So coming into the 2.0 version. So we really, I just want to kind of put these, synthesize these for everybody. So we want to put these policy recommendations into action this year and beyond. And again, it's also happening in other states like Oregon. I literally had somebody come up to me and I was talking about Oregon in a different conference, saying, how do we do what we do in Oregon and Washington? Like, when's the next legislative session start? Let's go. This is happening in a lot of different places now, where people are really starting to be fed up with power outages. Wildfires are an issue, like extreme weather in all parts of the country, and seeing the blue sky benefits of microgrids. The energy optimization benefits are tremendous, and we should not be leaving those on the table with a half program like the MIP. So changing 218 to make it just abundantly clear that microgrids are not considered public utilities is number one, first and foremost. I do think it's really important, and I think a lot of our colleagues agree, that creating a designation like a community microgrid operator in statute, kind of like what Oregon is doing, allowing that to be a regulatory framework, so that there is some level of oversight. There's a process by which you have to be certified to build a microgrid. You can't just have anybody go and doing that stuff. We're not talking about taking over whole cities. We're talking about discrete geographic areas, but allowing for these, like having a designation and a framework by which you can build microgrids in a community level, that would be really helpful. And by doing that, you should be allowed to do master metering and sub-metering technology and local distribution infrastructure, so you can serve multiple customers and cross rights of way and optimize the energy infrastructure and the generation, storage, and control, so that you can serve both the included customers again, as well as support the grid. So we really want to develop tariffs that maximize local electron sharing, as well as provide compensation for grid services. So we have that monetization pathway that makes these projects financeable. So we don't need grants and subsidies. We don't need to go through 10 years of going back and forth on, well, we need another scope of work, we need another grant for this. We ran out of money here. If we have just a clear financing mechanism and a monetization pathway, we don't need any grants or subsidies. And then this was a new one that we had, which is creating an option and formal process for enabling the buyout of utility infrastructure that's at the end use or at a customer level, like what Blue Lake Rancheria did. If we had that process, then it would be a lot clearer and easier for us to figure out how much is it really going to cost to build a microgrid? What does the full scope of a project look like? So I think with EcoBlock in particular, actually all of them, like Lancaster and Boston Avocado as well. I mean, there were so many different iterations that we had to go through with design. Every new barrier created a new design challenge. They created a new stakeholder engagement integration challenge, and then getting communities to buy into a new idea every time, versus if you just know all the rules straight up and you have a clear idea of what the costs are going to be, because everything is very clearly stated. We can actually build a lot more of these just for having regulatory certainty and understanding what the kind of the scope of the cost might be, versus just, I think, a lot of unknowns contributed to a lot of things not panning out the way we originally envisioned. And finally, creating this all kind of boils down to why is this so hard in the first place, and why isn't this rule ever already not been changed? We have some systemic business model issues, some systemic regulatory challenges, some systemic political challenges, with the investor-owned utility business model being one for the 20th century. when we originally built our grid, we had to have the cost of service regulatory model, literally for the 20th century, because we needed to build out the grid, we need to build out infrastructure to serve electricity to everybody, to the masses, because it's considered a public good. You could consider that, check. Utilities, great job. We have built out the grid. Everyone has access to cheap, relatively cheap, reliable power at scale. Now, that model does not serve us in the 21st century, where we now care about things like having clean energy and sustainability. We now have some really significant reliability and resiliency challenges because of our extreme weather and climate change. We do have customers that are a lot more sophisticated that want to try all these new technologies. And guess what? Technology has evolved. So we need a regulatory model that really looks at our 21st century energy needs and challenges, not one for the 20th century. And so with the the cost of service regulatory model, it really just incentivizes the monopolies to build out capital infrastructure and profit on that at the expense of customers. And if we created a framework that was more of them being a network provider, a distribution system operator, as Lorenzo Christoph has penned it, with an open access model. And if we're not gonna, if we have the worst of both worlds in California, right now we have a cost of service regulatory model with a captured regulator, and basically we lose every time. We're paying all of those investor risk costs, and like there's no low cost of capital in this model. And otherwise, we might as well make it public. So if we otherwise might as well have them have performance-based regulation. We're gonna let them continue to be private entities that are regulated. They should be regulated based on performance, like every other business that has to do that out there. So there's an element of competition, there's an element of urgency when it comes to responding to customer needs. So we actually drive down costs and we can actually get things done more quickly. Weekly meetings, oh gosh, I mean, how many people got paid off of that for however long? So, but that's a systemic energy policy change. But the reason I bring that up is because if we did have either a model like that that's focused on performance-based regulation and the utilities got paid, they got like their profits based on how well they did their job. Like, could you imagine a world which instead of getting a 12% rate of return on transmission build out, they got a 12% rate of return on how many interconnections they did with customers for microgrids as fast as possible? How different would our world look with just that one? And then there's a whole bunch of other elements of performance-based regulation I won't get into, but this is one of the systemic ones. So if we look at those things, I think that's where we kind of come into this 2.0. We'd love to see more. And by the way, Oregon is also another state that's passed performance-based regulation policy. There's a few other states that have done it too. So people are, and communities in other jurisdictions are starting to see these challenges and actually addressing them. So hopefully California can take the lessons learned from all these AEC projects, and as well as all lessons learned we have in the field and elsewhere for us to get like to where we need to go. And so with that, I will close out.
Let's open it up right now. I think this is a great time to have some discussion. We got almost 15 minutes, so GSO, market structure, CMO concept. Yes, Loretta.
No, that's okay. I'm loud.
We need that advice.
So it's not a question, it's just before we have a new governor appoint, right? Because one of the prior speakers in a prior breakout said there'll be a new governor. Woohoo! However, well, be careful what we wish for, right? But that said, before then, there is something that has changed on the legal landscape that you may or may not know about, which is Communities for a Better Environment lawsuit at the California Supreme Court won this summer. So for the first time since the 1930s, the courts will now look at the PUC and whether or not they followed the statute on the same basis as they look at every other administrative agency for the first time, which means the PUC has to follow the law. Imagine that. So all these arguments about we have a legal memo and we gave it to the PUC and they said talk to the hand are over as long as you do two things. Participate at the PUC, file an application for rehearing when they deny you, because you will be denied, and then take them to court. Because the judges are now primed to actually look to see, did the PUC follow the law? And I'd say Rule 218 is really clear. If you're not selling for compensation, it does not apply to you. Those words have meaning. So therefore, I want to say kudos to CBE for taking it. CBD, so sorry, CBD, the Center for Biological Diversity, so sorry, Roger, so embarrassed that I mixed those up, for taking this lawsuit since 2022 to the California Supreme Court and back. briefs are in at the appellate court, and so basically the California Supreme Court said, hey, appellate court, you did the wrong thing, you gave deference to the PUC. The PUC is not entitled to deference about what the statute says it has to do. Your court, you know how to read a statute, read the statute, decide whether the PUC followed the statute. And I can tell you from long experience, the PUC does not follow its own statutes, and its own legal division will tell commissioners the law is whatever you want it to be, because we get to decide what the law means. And finally, that is no longer the law in the state of California. So the Supreme Court sent it back to the appellate court. The appellate court will decide, if they don't do oral arguments, by April, whether or not the PUC followed the law in creating NEM 3. If they did not, and I believe that CBD has some killer briefing on exactly how they ignored the law, then what will happen is NEM 3 will be vacated by the middle of April.
Oh, that is a juicy change. Thank you. Yeah.
So take them to court.
Thank you, Loretta. Are we good? Thank you, Loretta. I was gonna say the same thing. What about the Supreme Court? 218, do you have a model 218 that addresses the sort of world we want to be creating, and how would we get access to that?
When you would say a model 218, like
you said it, did you rewritten? Did you rewrite it?
yes, I have rewritten it. I will just disclose, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not technically a registered lobbyist right now. I would say I do a lot of lawyering lobbying, even though I'm not either. We actually worked Reinvention Power the Microgrid Resource Coalition, and a lot of organizations in this room and elsewhere worked with Assemblyman Connolly 2 years ago on actually a rewrite of Section 218. So there was actually at one point a version of that bill that we had written that literally looked at rewriting it and cleaning it up rather dramatically. That bill did not move forward in the legislature. I won't get all the details about hearings going off the rails. But yes, there are a number of different frameworks that you could use in terms of rewriting 218. So there's a couple different approaches to it, just briefly. I think a clean rewrite for the 21st century is what is necessary, because there's way too many ways you can interpret different pieces of that to not follow the law. That if you just look at Section 218, B1, you don't even have to go any further than that in terms of own use. So the applications of all the AEC projects, you could just say that's an own use and then you're done. But there are a couple different other scenarios, like Google was looking to do like mixed use projects where they had like their districts, and now they have like San Jose even went so far as to try to create a municipal utility, yada yada yada. There's a lot of different configurations of microgrids that might be looking at, again, multiple customers where you are sharing power across across property lines, and you might even want to say like, we do want to resell electricity, but it's under certain circumstances, or you're not allowed to charge more than you otherwise get if you were reporting electricity from the point of common coupling, what have you. So I think a clean rewrite for the 21st century is necessary to clear up just a lot of confusion that you could, if you read it, it's just very confusing to how that works. There's a lot of, exemptions. You could just add an exemption, like where the electric vehicle charging infrastructure was. They just added a new section that said electric vehicle charging is not considered a public utility. You could add when it says microgrids, by definition of the Stern legislation, are not considered a public utility, and then add some boundaries on what that looks like. Again, can't be so many more than so many square miles in capacity, can't be more than this many customers, can't serve more than, can't have more than 5 megawatts of peak load. There's a lot of different ways you could put some, as I say, bounds on the scope of microgrids that were not the utilities and their cronies like to say well, you're just gonna let whole cities take over, the whole cities will be microgrid. And it's well, no, we're not talking about municipalization. We're not talking about San Francisco's municipalization lawsuit. We're talking about discrete geographic areas. You could even say a circuit or a feeder, but again, we don't want to limit the possibilities. So I think a clean rewrite's necessary, but you could add some just exemptions and then some boundaries on the scope, to say what is a microgrid truly beyond the definition of what's already in statute. And then I think there's a couple other ways you could slice and dice it. I do think our master metering laws could be updated so that it's very clear that master metering, one of the real big issues there is that you have these sleazy mobile home park owners and slumlords of apartment buildings that were just upcharging for electricity and not giving tenants a bill. And then they were just like, well, what are we paying for? And that was a real issue. And I just want to acknowledge the lawmakers on that. That was a real issue. So, but if you have sub-metering where individual like properties or individual buildings have their own meter and it's still revenue grade, you can accurately account for like the costs and the benefits of generation, storage, sharing power. And so long as that master meter is like still recording everything, and that there's sub meters that also have the accurate billing and cost and like actual energy usage recorded for the tenants or the buildings or whatever you might have, you should be able to resell electricity. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to reselling electricity and providing a cheaper cost, frankly. So right now, that's kind of not really clear in the law, like whether or not you can resell electricity at all, even if it was actually at a discounted rate. So we have all these like bill credit programs, like NEM is a crediting program technically, right? So if we were to allow, or like, how do you account for like, we had a value stack of the different services microgrids could provide. Like I was looking at it as a menu. Like if you had a menu of like every service microgrids can provide and then said, there's a value associated with this, you could stack them all up, just like a restaurant and a menu, or menu in a restaurant. Like that's what it would look like. And so how do you then distribute the benefits to customers? So I think that there's some more clarity in some of those laws that could be like made, like that would help us a lot in terms of like how can you distribute power across property lines? How do you go about reselling electricity? Or like if we were to say, well, let's do a co-op model, like what is a cooperative? What does it take to set up a cooperative? And I think the Oregon legislation is, I'd say, really, really strong. That package of bills, it really looks at getting at the heart of, we allow microgrids of any different shape, size, and configuration. They don't really put a whole lot of bounds on scope and size. And they have a process by which they're saying, we're going to create these microgrid zones by which there's an approval process. So there's not just no oversight, you know, and there has to be, and then they're also allowing for third-party interconnection to actually reduce some of the bottlenecks there. So I think that Oregon legislation is really, really strong. That's a good model, but those are some ideas in terms of how we might like go about it. I know it's a long-winded way. I could, you know, share with you many other suggestions.
Everybody get their lighter now, be like. Let me just say that, we did one iteration of this community microgrid white paper that we frankly did not distribute widely for a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons was we wanted to kind of get our advocacy coalition going and kind of figure out how we could actually translate the principles, which Allie mostly went over, of the CMO and so on, which is a pretty expanding idea. And we brought her back on to basically update and flesh out some of the things like would be a CMO and exactly how would they relate to some of the other entities levels of the system, and then bring in ideas from Oregon and elsewhere that have transpired since then. So we're knock on wood, by the end of March, we will have an updated version of that and hopefully an advocacy coalition that I hope all of you will join, because this is an amazing group to join a coalition. And indeed, there's one you can join and move this forward, because we're ready to go. And the arguments are so fantastically compelling.
That's a good segue. First, to thank the panelists, and